Hey, English 101, we're back with another video here. This video is covering integrating sources or how you take that outside evidence and bring that into your paper, how you integrate it using your own writing. Basically, as the subtitle says, you are speaking for your sources. When you provide a quote in a paper, you don't really want to think that it just speaks for itself and that your audience will automatically know how to interpret it. You need to make sure to tell your audience what to think about it, how to comprehend this evidence. This video will go in exactly how to do that in your paper. So let's get started. There are three objectives to being able to integrate sources properly. The first thing is to use your sources concisely. The second thing is to include signal phrases. And the last thing is to connect back to your thesis. All right? So this video is going to cover how to do exactly these three things. The first thing on the list is how to use your sources concisely. And what's really important is to make sure that you are communicating a lot of information in a little bit of space. And I know that may sound hard on paper, so that's why I've provided a few steps here. First and foremost, do not quote excessively. Around 10% of your paper should be quoted material. Again, I want to hear your words. I want to read your words. Your audience wants to read your words. So it's not a good idea to throw your paper out of balance, having a very large proportion of quotes versus your own words. A good way to accomplish this is don't always feel like the whole sentence has to be quoted. If you're trying to quote a couple sentences, look in there and see if there's a certain phrase with a bit of information that is really relevant to what you're saying. Also, be sure to summarize long passages if you just want to cover their main ideas. If you just want to get across the gist of what an article is about, I would definitely suggest you summarize. Here's an example. Instead of pulling a whole passage and use block quoting, use those ellipses or the three dots to connect ideas. Remember, this was covered in our MLA PowerPoint, and here's an example. This comes from our sample essay 2. Currently, the campus features a Computer Information Technology 105 class, which, according to the KCTCS course catalog, covers topics including computer hardware and software, file management, the internet, email, basic use of application, programs, systems, and utility software. There's your citation. Notice how right here in the red we have three dots. If you flip to page 257 of the course catalog, you'll notice that the phrase before the three dots and after the three dots are a little bit further apart. There's some text there that we've omitted. We do this because not all of the text in that passage is particularly relevant to our paper. We use the three dots to connect two ideas that are most relevant to what we're trying to say. And by doing that, we limit the amount of quotations we use in our paper. I also want you to take notice of the italicized and underlined part according to the KCTCS course catalog covers. All right? What that is right there is what's called a signal phrase, which is going to be the topic of our next slide. We want to include signal phrases whenever we introduce quotes. So what you do is you prepare your audience for the source material by providing context. We've gone over this word in class, but as a reminder, context are the circumstances that form a setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. Put yourself in the shoes of the audience member. They haven't read the evidence that you find. They might not even know it exists. So you have to kind of fill them in. You have to let them know who wrote it, what the title of it is, what it was published in, what website you found it on, what date, and maybe even some more information about the author. Down in our next bullet, you always want to give the author, if there is one, and be sure to give background info about them. Just do a quick Google search of the author. Are they an authority on the subject? Again, maybe give a little bit of info into what their career is to lend yourself a bit of credibility. Be sure, if there's no author, to give the title. And then always consider using the publication name or website name and the date of publication also. You don't have to cram all that information here. Obviously, we've said that the author is the most important. But again, think about what's most relevant to what you're trying to communicate. And then last, adding this context lends credibility to your writing and it helps integrate outside information smoothly. As it says, you prepare your audience for this source material. They know what to expect. Here's how to write these things. Signal phrases contain nouns that provide context, such as the author's name, the title, the publication, the website, the date. All those things are nouns and adjectives that provide context to give us the detail. And verbs that lead into the cited material. If you check out page 406 of Writer's Reference at the very bottom in the yellow box, there's a big list of example signal phrases as well as verbs you want to use in signal phrases. These verbs should always be in the present or present perfect tense, never in the past. Your evidence is kind of always ongoing, so that's why you want to refer to it in the present, because your argument or your proposal is essentially occurring in the present as well. Take a look at our example. This is one from the list on 406. Mary and Nessel New York University professor of nutrition and public health, suggests. I want you to take a look at the yellow first. Obviously, we have the author's name, Marion Nestle. We tell what her occupation is. She's an NYU professor of nutrition and public health. Right then and there, not only do we know who the person's name is, but we know why they're credible to talk about, whatever it is they're about to talk about, which here seems to be nutrition and public health. They don't give the title, they don't give the date of publication. You don't want it to be too long. This seems like it's enough when it comes to being relevant to your subject matter. In the red, we have the verb suggests. Marion Nestle suggests is basically the action, the subject and predicate of that sentence. So we use suggest to show that this is her comments or this is the advice she has to offer on this. If you take a look at the box on page 406, you'll notice suggest is one of the words on there, in the fourth column actually. Many of those words may not fit with this sentence, with the evidence that's about to be used. If we said Marion Nestle denies or Marion Nestle disputes or contends, we're basically saying that she's in disagreement with something. So if your author is supporting something or in agreement or emphasizing something, some of these words you don't want to use. For essay 2, some ones that I recommend are suggests, endorses, emphasizes, asserts, believes, and agrees, and maybe argues too. Be sure to avoid the ones that show contradiction here, because again, you're proposing things. You don't want really any evidence that contrasts what you're trying to propose. Obviously, with that list, you want to be dynamic. You want to change up your signal phrasing. Consider how you're using the source. Are you providing background information? Are you explaining a concept? Are you arguing or proposing? Many of these different words fit many different purposes or many different things you're going to be doing in there. So again, be sure to think about how exactly you're using that evidence when picking out your verb as well as the nouns that provide context. So after you've led in and with your signal phrase and after you provided your quote and cited it obviously, now we want to connect back to the thesis. On your outlines, you'll notice that this is referred to as analysis. All right. So whenever I ask you to do analysis, for example, on a comment on your outline or your drafts, I'm asking you to connect back to the thesis to show me how this evidence supports the thesis. As our first bullet says there, the most important thing to answer when connecting back to your thesis is obviously the question, how does this evidence support the thesis? Again, your answer shows how the evidence is relevant to your proposal. These things are your interpretive comments and they don't need to be cited. Again, what I'm more concerned with, as we talked about in the very first slides of this video, are your words, your ideas, what you think about what you're trying to propose. Now, we need evidence to support this. You can't argue this based on your own opinion. But the main thing I want to know is what are your comments? What are your ideas about the evidence you just read? All right? That's why analysis is so important. Here's how we write it. If you look down the second bullet, you'll notice that I include something called show verbs, which should be somewhat familiar to us now. Show verbs are essentially signal phrases. What they do, instead of leading into a quote, they show a link back to the thesis. So this shows is kind of the stock one that you can use, but you can use something like this reflects, this illustrates, this suggests, this portrays. Many of these show verbs just simply show a link from the evidence back to the thesis. Take a look at the example. This illustrates only minor differences between the core content of the two courses. Both CIT 105 and IMD 114 require computers with basic document writing and internet function. Their main difference is how students explore proper usage of those abilities. If you take a look at the bold red text, and again, before I go into this is also from our sample essay, by the way. The red text there is our show verb, our signal phrase for our analysis here. All right? So we have this illustrates. Those two words, even though they may seem simple, they're really major in that they connect back to the thesis. If you look at the rest of the yellow text, that's a reflection on the evidence that was presented. So using those two words automatically creates a link all the way back to the thesis. This is something you want to feature at the end of every body paragraph following your quoted, paraphrased, or summarized evidence. All right, just to step back and review, we have a three-step process for integrating sources. Number one, we want to use sources concisely, emphasizing our own words, and once again, don't overuse quotations. About 10% of your paper, again, should be quotations. That's a good number to go off of on any assignment. Two, include signal phrases. Be sure to provide the relevant context to the source, especially the author's name. And then use a verb that fits the manner in which you're using the source. Remember our list on page 406. And last, connect back to the thesis. Explain to your audience how that evidence relates to your thesis. Be sure to use the show verb signal phrases. And once again, this should always follow your cited evidence and should be near the end of each body paragraph. All right, guys, that's it for the video on integrating sources. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email, rran0001@kctcs.edu.